Hi, welcome to the AIM on MS&T podcast. If this is your first time listening to our podcast, first off, welcome. We are happy to have you. Second, AIM stands for Academia, Industry, and Military, which are the main sectors that make up Central Florida's modeling, simulation, and training community. On our podcast, we talk with different leaders in the MS&T community. We also talk about all the cool and innovative things their organizations are doing, trends that affect the MS&T field as a whole, and keep you up to date with what's going on. If you're not a part of the modeling and simulation community, we hope to share some insights about this important sector of Orlando's economy, which ranks just behind the theme park and hospitality industries. I'm your host, Kate Finkel, and today we are talking with Lieutenant Colonel Rory Hermann, Product Manager for Range Training Systems, Program Manager Training Systems, also known as TRASYS, which is a part of Marine Corps System Command, also known as MARCOR SysCom. Colonel, thank you for joining us today. To start this podcast off, how did the Marine Corps put you on path to your current role in the modeling, simulation, and training community?
Well, thank you for having me. I started out as a communications officer in the Marine Corps in 2007. I worked at the communications company. I was an advisor to Afghan forces. I worked at MEF staff, and I was also part of regimental staff for 8th Marine Regiment and Task Force Southwest as their communications officer. But in between those operational tours, I had recurrent tours with Marine Corps Systems Command on and off. So starting out as a lieutenant, worked on hardware and software projects, so I had time with learning about, both from the communication side and from the acquisition side, how the hardware and software are brought together to create an effective capability. And then my time with the fleet gave me a perspective as the training audience. What are the things that you want to see? Where do you find your deficiencies? And how do you look to a training provider to fill those gaps for you? That's been how I've been able to come into this position and know where things need to move.
Thank you for explaining that. Now that our audience knows a little insight into your backstory and how you got where you are today, in your own words, how did TRASYS come to be, and how has its mission evolved into what it is now?
TRASYS started out during the early 2000s. Up until that point, the Marine Corps and the Army had always collaborated on training capabilities because we use very similar equipment. But during the War on Terror, with the influx of extra funding in order to provide training before deployments, the Marine Corps decided it needed an extra capability to manage those funds and make sure that they're being spent appropriately and on the right equipment. So TRASYS was developed as a reaction to that, to do emergency kind of contracting, get the capabilities out to the users as quickly as possible. Since that time, the mission has evolved to become more of a long-term planning and equipment. We work with our requirement sponsor, Training and Education Command, at Range Training Products Division, to figure out what the Marine Corps needs in the future and to acquire that capability from the ground up.
Oh, okay. Switching on to the topic of projects, what kind of projects are you able to talk about that TRASYS is currently developing and show potential to break new ground in improving Marine warfighter readiness? Possibly in the means of safety, improved student retention, or some other types of innovation?
So on the range training system side, we focus on the physical, live training capabilities that Marines use every day. So we don't focus as much on the simulation side of things, although we do interact with the side, which I'll get to. But we focus on the capabilities you either use on a live fire range or against another thinking adversary. So, for example, we have the Force on Force project, which is, we kind of jokingly refer to it as high-tech laser tag. It adjudicates your tactical engagements.
Okay.
So that way, when you pull the trigger, it's not somebody telling you you hit or missed. The system can actually tell you whether or not you hit or missed based on not only did your laser make contact with the target, but also it knows the distance to the target. So would that round have actually gone that far? It can adjudicate through buildings, it can adjudicate for vehicles, so that gives the Marines a chance to actually practice their real-life tactics, techniques, and procedures before ever going forward, and then also have someone react dynamically to what they're doing in a real-world environment, not just in a war game, but actually having to deal with the frustrations of time, space, weather, all the things that don't get included on a sand table exercise or a simulation.
Right.
And then we also have the electronic warfare ground instrumented ranges, which is there to train Marines how to recognize the operations in the electronic environment and also how to respond to it. So it's getting after the full spectrum capabilities that exist beyond your traditional shoot, move, and communicate, but also how the congested spectrum that we live in might affect your future operations, so that it adds an extra layer of complexity to their training and prepares them for operation in the real world. And all of this ties back into the live virtual constructive training environment. We say that we are the live piece of that triangle with RTS, and always looking at how do we combine that so we can expand our training beyond just our limited geographical area, but also affect training audiences that may be on another continent through that constructive virtual simulation.
We are definitely looking forward to those upcoming projects. Now, like many organizations in Orlando's MS&T community, PM TRASYS does a good deal of collaboration with other entities in our ecosystem. As I understand it, particularly with PRIO-STRI, given the similarities between the Army, the Navy, and Marine Corps missions, could you describe any collaborations either with STRI or another organization that you'd like our listeners to know about?
It's great to be down here in Orlando because we get to work with the Army and the Navy. Obviously, there's been a Marine Corps element down here for a much longer period, but working as a liaison with the Navy. But right now, we work with them because our requirements are so similar. There's several ways where we can influence each other. For example, some technologies are a one-to-one relationship. So, for example, with the Navy, we have the underwater egress trainer. Well, the Navy has many more of those than we do, so we've been able to leverage their knowledge, experience, and sometimes even their contracts to get after those capabilities faster and more efficiently for the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
And then other times with the Army, the one-for-one would be targetry. Everybody shoots the same rounds at the same targets. So when they do developments on targets that we might like in the future, we're able to leverage that and get a better price for both the taxpayer and a better solution for the Marines that lasts longer and is more resilient. Meanwhile, there are other capabilities that are similar, but we're able to use each other as almost a competition to find the best capabilities and get those out. So for example, with Force on Force, we go with a laser-based solution. So we are limited by certain amounts of terrain, line of sight specifically, because the laser has to see the target. Whereas the Army pursues more of a geolocation-based solution. When you pull the trigger, it knows where you are, it knows where the target is. It doesn't have to see the target, and it can adjudicate that.
Yeah.
There are benefits and problems with both of those solutions, so we're able to leverage each other, and it doesn't have to be an either-or. It can be something where you pull the best from both.
Right.
And so we've been able to give them ideas on technologies we've seen that we are going after that they may be able to use, and also pull in some of the capabilities they've found that solve problems that we know that our solution will never reach. So how do we integrate that to create a better holistic piece?
Looking at the big picture of the global stage, what do you see going on in the world in the current moment, for example, areas of conflict, near-peer competitor activities, etc., that you think presents the most likely scenario that Marines need to be prepared for and trained to handle right now?
The most important change that I see coming down is distributed operations, because of the unmanned aerial capabilities that are so common nowadays, even with civilian capabilities. Same thing with advanced intelligence and surveillance capabilities. Google can see your house and your car and its imagery. So there's no reason that even a low-tech competitor wouldn't be able to look for your locations and influence you anytime that you aggregate. And so now we have to teach Marines how to disperse more than we ever have before. And thankfully, Force Design has already directed us towards that end. But now we actually need to start doing the training that simulates that and forces Marines to get into that mentality earlier. And that's something where, as I mentioned, between our live capabilities and the virtual constructive, we really can push the geographical bounds in ways that we haven't before. And that gives Marines the opportunities to not only train with audiences and partners that they didn't in the past, but also train at distances and have to work through those problems in a safe environment back home before they have to go forward.
Kind of staying on the same topic, what things do you see having the potential to have the most impact on PM TRASYS and their mission, and how it trains Marines in the near future? And to clarify, I don't necessarily mean potential conflicts, but these considerations could also include things like business trends or new emerging tech that could change the training game in the future.
Well, one of the things that I've seen since I've been down here at PM Training Systems, especially going to ITSEC and some of the other industry conferences, which has been a great opportunity to see the state of the art, is that there is especially from my perspective, a large shift over to the simulated world, modeling capabilities. It is definitely a growth industry, but sometimes that leaves some of the more classical capabilities, live fire training, your atmospheric effects, smoke generators, sound generators, things that increase the realism for the Marine who's on the ground are becoming a little bit fewer and farther between. This last year I did see a lot more of that at ITSEC, which was great to see, and I hope that trend continues in the future so we have a nice balance of both the real and the constructive.
Yeah.
I also see from the military side, the environment we're going into, not only are we upgrading all of our training capabilities, we're also simultaneously moving towards that force design and distributed operations, so we're upgrading all the other capabilities. So there's always a balance, hard decisions have to be made, and that will influence what capabilities we're able to get working along with our requirement sponsor to find the right thing for the right price.
As we come to an end of this podcast, we'd like to end on this one last question. Given everything you've learned on your own professional journey in the Marine Corps, what advice would you give someone who is interested in pursuing a career in this area? To put it in another way, what do you wish someone had told you when you first started on the path that led you to where you are now?
I think the advice that I would give would be to focus on the big picture and not just one technical area, but to learn how that affects people in the field. I feel like my background, having been the one receiving the training, gives me that perspective to see how small changes in technologies can influence what you're able to do and not do in the field. And so understanding the broad spectrum and also how we plan to change, how we operate, and just the changes in the world gives you a better idea of how you can direct your studies and your development in the future. I wish I had spent more time studying some of the AI and some of the more advances in computer science, because those are definitely going to be influential in how we create new training capabilities in the future. So I think that anybody who's interested in getting into that should look at those capabilities, but again, always in relation to the broad spectrum of Marine Corps operations.
That is great advice, and hopefully someone out there listening was taking some notes. I just want to say thank you for joining us today and sharing your story. For everyone listening, to keep you updated on future events in the modeling and simulation community, check out our website, teamorlando.org. You'll also find us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook for more recent news and upcoming events. If you're interested in sponsoring an episode of AIM on MS&T or being a featured guest, please reach out to Team Orlando News. The link will be below. We are now going to end this episode here. Again, I'd like to thank our guest, Lieutenant Colonel Rory Hermann, for joining us today, and we hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to follow the AIM on MS&T podcast on your platform of choice, and we will see you on the next one. Bye!